Absolutely gruesome. And one thing this points to when you're looking at what might be the organization who inspired this is that it tilts the balance in favor of this likely being inspired or attached to in some way the Islamic State. If you look at the two major organizations that have been inspirational in terrorist attacks in France, those are the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda for jihadist terrorism. And the Islamic State is much more overtly brutal. Beheadings are somewhat of a signature for the organization. And to them, this is a sign of strength, whereas Al-Qaeda, while also brutal, tends to be a little bit more reasonable, at least for its target audience. They want to contrast themselves to the Islamic State's overt brutality and come across as the more reasonable jihadist organization, again, relative to their particular audience of sympathizers.
And Charlie, this appears to be a multi-layered attack because this victim, who doesn't seem to be connected with the factory, was beheaded outside the factory, and then the two suspects tried to drive a car with explosives into the factory, presumably, says the president in France, to set off a large explosion. What do you make of the multi-layered attack here?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. It's being multi-layered is evident, the fact that the attackers wanted to maximize publicity for it. So having a beheaded individual with Arabic scrawled all over the head, I mean, of course, that's going to capture the media's attention. And it does seem that they're trying to create much larger explosions than the small ones that went off. So, I mean, it's very clear to me that clearly this was an attack for publicity more than anything else.
We keep saying there were two suspects inside that car, David. It's a little bit murky right now. The French President Francois Hollande said that there is a suspect in custody and has been identified, and he indicates that there may have been a second person involved. Unclear whether that person was killed or could still be on the loose right now. Let's focus on what we know on. The suspect, David, in custody and identified. That is a new development since we last spoke.
Absolutely, and the fact that he's been identified as an attacker is significant. Often in cases such as this, you'll have someone who's picked up but who's more peripheral to the plot rather than someone who was really serving as the tip of the spear. The other thing is, as I've mentioned, basically every time you have a major terrorist incident, you have a flood of information. A lot of it proves not to be accurate. Facts will get adjusted over time. So, I mean, we have the sketch of what has occurred, but I expect some of these details will shift a bit as we learn more information.
No, and to be clear, we're just relaying what we are being told by French authorities. In some cases, the president of France, who seems to be a somewhat reliable source, at least on what they know about the investigation right now. Charlie, what can you tell me about this area of France, the southeastern part of the country near Lyon, a remote-ish area outside an industrial city? We were in Paris after the Charlie Hebdo attack. Are there possible terrorist recruits all over that country?
Well, I think we need to be careful in terms of what words we use in dealing with this kind of thing. I mean, there has been a lot of agitation through propaganda that has been seeking to mobilize jihadists in France, of course. But in terms of whether there are recruits all over the country, I think that would be probably a stretch of the reality. Now, in terms of the target itself, it is interesting that it was a factory that was targeted. There have been a number of studies of terrorist attacks in Europe, and actually commercial installations like this one have usually come quite low down the list of targets. I mean, an attack in Paris is sure to be very, very high profile and maximize casualties. It seems that this was perhaps a target of well, an easy target, rather. I mean, of course, it wasn't easy, but something which is more vulnerable to attack than something like the Charlie Hebdo offices in Paris. And that could simply be a reflection of the reality of the security situation in France, that it's not so easy to hit towns and cities anymore.
A soft target, per se. And just to be clear, I wasn't suggesting that there are tens of thousands of possible terrorists running all over France. I was just trying to get a sense of the geographic dispersal of possible activists inside that country. And David, along those lines, I wonder if you can give me a sense right now of the battle against recruits, ISIS and otherwise, in France specifically, and also in other countries in Europe right now.
One of the most interesting developments is that Europol is now standing up a cell which is designed to basically take ISIS recruiters, ISIS supporters, and get them off of social media. This is very interesting because one reason that ISIS has been so good at mobilizing people to its cause is because of its mastery of social media. Terrorism in general has been a group affair because to get somebody to carry out something extreme like a terrorist attack where they could lose their life, they might the odds are that they'll lose their freedom. It generally takes group dynamics to reinforce their extremism, to spur them on to action, and to not allow group members to back out. Social media increasingly has been playing the role of this group. Now, one big change over the course of 2015 has been that Twitter has been much more aggressive at kicking people off of Twitter. I think one reason, and when I say kicking people off, I mean people who are associated with ISIS, associated with jihadist activities. Facebook has the same set of policies. They'll also remove profiles of people who are terrorist supporters, but they have to be reported by other community members first. They don't police it themselves. So the Europol cell being set up, which that's the European Policing Organization, would be specifically designed to go after these kind of profiles, to stop this this mobilization technique that ISIS has been so effective at. You have a lot of other kinds of measures that are being done by France on the both community engagement and also de-radicalization front that have been implemented both before and also in the wake of the Charlie Hebdo attack. But I think looking to social media makes a lot of sense given how useful that tool has been for mobilization.
Let me just remind people what we're seeing right now. And we did have some pictures moments ago of this factory in southeastern France. Suspects apparently tried to drive a car with explosives through the gates of a chemical factory, a compressed air plant, to set off a larger explosion. French President Francois Hollande calls this a terrorist attack, and the most gruesome detail is there was a victim outside the factory, someone who was decapitated, beheaded, and his head somehow posted on a fence outside this factory with a note in Arabic writing. We're going to have much more on these developments throughout the morning. David Gartenstein-Ross, thanks so much. Charlie Winter, appreciate you being with us.
Other breaking news that we're following today, a deadly sightseeing plane crash in Alaska. The small plane, a float plane, slamming into a cliff. 8 of those victims were cruise passengers on an excursion during their voyage.